Have you ever wondered why some people seem incredibly lucky? As if success just follows them around. Better jobs, smarter investments, healthier lives. It's not luck. It's their habits. Most of us think luck is random. But the truth, as James Clear shows in Atomic Habits, is that luck often hides inside the small daily choices we repeat without even noticing. Imagine this. Two people, same income, same opportunities. One chooses to spend impulsively each day. The other saves just 1% more, invests wisely, repeats it. After a few years, one is stuck, and the other looks lucky. But is it really luck? Or is it the hidden compounding power of habits? That's what today's video is about. I'll show you how daily routines, tiny, almost invisible ones, create the kind of fortune that outsiders mistake for luck. And here's the best part. You don't need giant goals or iron willpower to get there. You just need systems. Habits so small they feel trivial, but powerful enough to change your trajectory forever. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'll help you unlock the hidden luck in your own daily habits. And once you see the code, you'll never look at your routines the same way again. I was 16 when my world cracked open in the middle of an ordinary school day. A baseball bat spinning out of control and slamming into my face with terrifying, bone-crushing force. The blow shattered my nose into a strange U-shape, broke several bones in my skull, and left both eye sockets fractured, while my brain slammed violently against the inside of my head. I didn't even remember the instant it happened, only the strange days afterward. Red spots spreading across my clothes as I pressed a borrowed shirt desperately against the stream of blood pouring down. My classmates tried to steady me, guiding me slowly across the field toward the nurse's office. Each second mattering more than anyone realized, my mind already slipping into confusion and frightening blank spaces. When she asked me basic questions, I answered with mistakes that revealed the swelling storm inside my head. The wrong year, the wrong president, and even a hesitation before remembering my own mother's name. Soon, I collapsed into unconsciousness, my body shutting down in ways I couldn't control, first with seizures, then with the loss of my ability to breathe, machines, and frantic doctors keeping me alive. A helicopter carried me to a hospital in Cincinnati, my mother gripping my hand as my chest rose only because a nurse squeezed oxygen into me manually, my father rushing separately to gather our family. Nearly 20 doctors and nurses surrounded me upon arrival, fighting seizures, swelling, and broken bones, until they decided my body couldn't endure surgery and placed me in a coma that lasted through the night. It wasn't the first time my parents had been in that building, because years earlier my little sister had fought leukemia there, and now, unimaginably, they face another child's fight for survival. When I finally woke, the damage was undeniable. My vision doubled, my face fractured, and even my left eye forced outward unnaturally, held only by fragile connections between nerve and brain. Recovery stretched endlessly, months of therapy relearning basic coordination, nearly a year before I could drive again, and even longer before I felt like myself, the shadow of depression hovering constantly nearby. Still, baseball mattered too much to abandon, even though my return to the game meant humiliation. Cut from varsity, tears in my car afterward, and the slow climb back with only fleeting chances to play. Yet that frustration became the seed of something bigger, because when I started college, I decided the only way forward was to take control through small habits, choices no one else noticed. I went to bed early when others stayed up. I kept my dorm tidy when chaos swirled around me. And I discovered that discipline in the little things gave me confidence in the bigger ones. Bit by bit, my body grew stronger, my studies sharper, and my role on the team larger. Until, years later, I became captain, earned recognition, and left school honored as one of its top athletes. Looking back, my athletic career was never legendary, but I know I reached my potential. And I did it not with huge leaps, but with countless small habits compounded over years. The accident taught me a truth I couldn't have learned any other way. Life changes not through grand transformations, but through tiny, almost invisible choices that multiply over time into remarkable results. I wasn't an overnight success in recovery, athletics, or business. I was simply someone who refused to stop stacking small wins, one on top of another, until they shaped the person I became. And that's why this book exists. Because the lessons I lived through, the power of little habits, the compounding nature of choices, the systems that build identity, are the same ones that can change your life. In 2003, the British cycling team was a punchline in professional sports, a century of mediocrity so deep that even manufacturers hesitated to sell them bikes, afraid their reputation would stain their products. Enter Dave Brailsford, a man with an almost detective-like obsession, who believed the secret wasn't hidden in grand strategies or miracle breakthroughs, but in relentlessly chasing 1% improvements everywhere they could be found. His philosophy sounded unimpressive at first, almost trivial, but his promise was bold. If you made dozens of tiny gains, improvements so small they seemed laughable alone, they would stack into something extraordinary. The team experimented with seat redesigns for comfort, rubbing alcohol on tires for grip, testing fabrics in wind tunnels, and even warming muscles with heated shorts, each adjustment so minor it seemed insignificant. But Brailsford pushed further into the unexpected, painting their truck interior white so dust couldn't hide, testing pillows for better sleep, and hiring surgeons to teach proper hand washing to avoid colds. Individually, these changes looked almost meaningless, but together they ignited a revolution. And within 5 years, the British cyclists were dominating Olympic events, smashing records, and capturing victories that had seemed impossible for generations. Soon after, they conquered the Tour de France, a race they had never before won. And over the next decade, they stacked championships, medals, and titles, rewriting the history of the sport entirely. How does a team transform from a laughingstock into a dynasty? The detective story here reveals a clue. Small changes, consistently applied, compound into results that look almost like magic when viewed later. It's easy to chase dramatic transformations, to wait for the one big breakthrough, the silver bullet that everyone notices. Yet it's the invisible 1% shifts that rewrite the trajectory of lives. If you improve by 1% daily for a year, you don't end 37% better. You end 37 times better. A compounding curve so sharp it astonishes those who witness it. The danger, though, lies in the reverse. Because slipping just 1% backward each day drags you toward decline, so gradually you hardly notice, until years later you're unrecognizable from who you once were. Habits are like compound interest for the mind and body, multiplying silently in the background, seemingly insignificant in the moment, but powerful enough to determine whether time becomes your ally or your enemy. When you save money once, you're not rich. When you lift weights twice, you're not strong. When you eat one unhealthy meal, you're not ruined. But compound those actions, and the difference grows massive. Every choice nudges your future slightly, like adjusting an airplane's path by a few degrees. At first, the shift is invisible, but stretched across years, you land in a completely different place. The frustration is that progress rarely feels immediate, like ice sitting solid at 25, 26, 27 degrees. Nothing appears to change until you hit 32, and suddenly all that stored effort melts everything. We crave instant evidence, and when it doesn't show, we quit too soon, abandoning the very habits that were quietly accumulating enough pressure to unleash transformation just beyond the invisible threshold. Patience is the detective's greatest ally here, because the truth hides under the surface, waiting for that critical moment when persistence pays off and others suddenly label you an overnight success. The problem is, goals distract us. We're taught to obsess over results, the medals, the promotions, the pounds lost. Yet goals alone don't differentiate winners from losers, because both sides usually want the same thing. What matters isn't the goal itself, but the system underneath, the process repeated daily, the little structures that quietly guarantee progress regardless of motivation, distraction, or temporary setbacks along the way. Systems keep you playing long after goals are met, because winning a race means nothing if you stop training the day after, just as cleaning a room means nothing if habits remain messy. A goal is about direction, but a system is about progress, a constant loop of refinement. The hidden machinery that determines whether your story keeps unfolding or collapses after a brief success. This is why habits are more powerful than bursts of inspiration. They anchor identity, shape behavior, and like atoms forming molecules, combine into structures far greater than the small routines that built them. Atomic habits are small in scale, but nuclear in potential, carrying within them the quiet force to rewire identity, build momentum, and ultimately shape the outcome of entire lives, careers, and legacies. So here's the mystery we now face. If habits are this powerful, if tiny actions can redirect entire destinies, what exactly determines whether those invisible routines stick long enough to transform us? Why is it so ridiculously easy to repeat bad habits, yet painfully hard to build good ones? As if our brains are wired to cling to what hurts and resist what heals? The real twist is that most people try to change at the wrong level, like chasing shadows instead of hunting the source, focusing on results instead of the deeper identity shaping everything. Imagine change as an onion, 3 layers thick, each peeling back to reveal something more fundamental. Outcomes on the outside, processes in the middle, and at the core, the identity driving them all. The outer layer deals with results, losing weight, publishing a book, earning a medal, landing a promotion, the visible trophies we set as goals, the easy targets that everybody notices first. Beneath that lies process, the routines and systems, how you train at the gym, how you structure your study schedule, how you practice meditation, or even how you keep your desk organized. At the deepest layer sits identity, the beliefs you hold about yourself, your worldview, your judgments of what kind of person you are, the silent convictions powering or sabotaging everything above. Most people chase the outer layers, setting goals and adjusting routines, yet never daring to rewrite the story at the core, where beliefs about identity quietly decide whether habits live or die. If you tell yourself you're trying to quit smoking, your focus is still tied to behavior. But if you claim you're not a smoker, your focus is on identity, a deeper shift. The person who says they're trying to run regularly fights against resistance. But the one who insists they are a runner doesn't negotiate. Every action either aligns with or betrays that identity. Each small choice you make is like casting a vote, not for an external prize, but for the kind of person you believe yourself to be, reinforcing identity through evidence. Write 1 page, and you are becoming a writer. Go to the gym once, and you are becoming an athlete. Save a single dollar, and you are becoming financially responsible. Every action matters because it's not isolated. It's evidence stacked on one side of the scale, slowly building a case in the courtroom of your own identity about who you truly are. Of course, one vote never decides the election, but repeated votes carve belief into stone, transforming self-image into a habit so deeply ingrained it no longer feels like effort. The dark side, though, is that destructive identities compound just as stubbornly. If you repeatedly confirm the belief that you're lazy, undisciplined, or unreliable, you'll live trapped by your own evidence. This is why change feels so hard. You try to build new habits without rewriting the underlying script, like painting over mold on a wall while the rot beneath spreads unchecked. Identity change works like a detective case. Evidence first, belief second, and the more proof you gather through action, the stronger your sense of who you are becomes over time. The truth is, real change is not about achieving a goal, but about becoming someone different, someone whose identity makes the desired behavior natural, inevitable, almost automatic in daily life. If habits are votes for identity, then every small decision is a clue left at the crime scene, shaping the long-term narrative of who you are becoming behind the scenes. That's why good habits feel fragile in the beginning. The case is weak, the evidence thin, and it takes consistent action to persuade your mind that this identity truly belongs to you. Over time, though, repetition builds confidence. The scale tips, and suddenly you're no longer trying to be healthy. You simply are a healthy person, every meal and workout confirming the reality. This is the great secret most people miss. Lasting habits are identity-based, not outcome-based, because once behavior matches who you believe yourself to be, quitting feels like betraying your very self. And here lies the question that pushes us deeper. If your habits both reflect and reinforce identity, then how exactly can you design small actions that steadily reshape who you are becoming? Every mystery has a code, a pattern hidden beneath the noise. And when it comes to human behavior, the structure of habits follows a sequence so simple yet powerful it explains almost everything we do. The sequence is fourfold: cue, craving, response, and reward. A loop that runs endlessly, shaping actions from brushing your teeth to checking your phone, each step feeding the next like gears in motion. A cue is the trigger, the little clue that says something should happen next, like seeing a plate of cookies or hearing your phone buzz, an external or internal signal sparking awareness. The cue doesn't cause action on its own. It stirs a craving, the desire for change, whether relief, pleasure, escape, or satisfaction. Because behind every habit lies a yearning to feel different. The craving drives the response, the actual behavior you perform, whether it's eating the cookie, picking up the phone, or lacing your shoes for a run, the physical manifestation of the desire. And then comes the reward, the final piece, delivering satisfaction, relief, or pleasure, cementing the association so that your brain remembers the loop and is ready to repeat it again later. This cycle, cue, craving, response, reward, is the habit loop, a detective's blueprint for understanding why behaviors repeat, why some stick permanently, and why others fade after only a few trials. Consider a smoker. The cue might be stress, the craving is relief, the response is lighting a cigarette, and the reward is the soothing calm, even if temporary, which reinforces the cycle. Or think of checking social media. The cue is boredom, the craving is stimulation, the response is opening the app, and the reward is novelty, connection, or amusement, enough to lock the loop. Every habit, good or bad, runs through these steps, and once you see the code, you realize the detective's trick. If you want to change habits, you must rewire the loop. The laws of behavior change flow directly from this structure. Make the cue obvious, make the craving attractive, make the response easy, and make the reward satisfying, each law targeting one step. The beauty of this model is its universality, because whether you're trying to start exercising, quit procrastinating, or build a writing practice, the loop remains the same. Only the details differ. Bad habits survive because the loop is strong, each piece reinforcing the other, while good habits often fail because the loop is weak, missing either clarity, attraction, ease, or satisfaction. If you ever wonder why motivation fades so quickly, it's because most people focus only on the response, trying to willpower their way through, ignoring the other elements quietly shaping the cycle. The detective's insight here is simple but profound. The best way to build better habits is not to push harder, but to redesign the environment so the loop naturally works in your favor. When cues are hidden, cravings dulled, responses difficult, and rewards weak, habits wither. But when cues are clear, cravings strong, responses simple, and rewards satisfying, habits blossom almost effortlessly over time. This is why tiny tweaks matter more than grand gestures, because each small adjustment in the loop strengthens or weakens the cycle, nudging behavior until it feels natural rather than forced. Habits aren't chains to be broken. They're codes to be cracked, and once you learn how the four-step sequence works, you hold the master key to reshaping nearly every pattern in your life. So the investigation continues. If these four steps are the foundation, how do we take the first law, making habits obvious, and use it to tilt behavior in our favor? One night in Minnesota, a woman sensed something wrong as she glanced at a man in a hospital waiting room, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't. He looked ordinary enough, sitting quietly, but her instincts whispered otherwise. And when security approached, they discovered he was armed, waiting to attack, a disaster prevented because someone noticed what didn't look right. That moment captures the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious, because cues drive habits, and the smallest signals, often invisible to others, can completely shift the direction of your actions. Our brains are constantly scanning for cues, like detectives hunting patterns, filtering the noise of life into signals worth responding to, even when we aren't aware the process is unfolding beneath consciousness. The woman didn't know why the man seemed off. Her brain simply flagged the details, tiny discrepancies her conscious mind couldn't articulate, yet powerful enough to spark suspicion and prevent catastrophe. That's how habits operate. Cues lead us into action, and the clearer the cue, the stronger the habit, which is why making cues visible is the cornerstone of intentional change. Think about brushing your teeth. The cue is seeing the toothbrush by the sink, an obvious reminder, and because the cue is consistent, the behavior becomes automatic, requiring almost no conscious effort. Now compare that to exercising. If your workout clothes are hidden in a drawer, the cue disappears, and the friction of invisibility makes the habit weaker before it even begins. This is why successful habit builders design their environment as carefully as detectives organize evidence, placing the right cues in plain sight and removing the wrong ones before they trigger destructive loops. The mind, however, plays tricks because cues are not neutral. They are tied to associations built over time, and once a link is forged, the presence of the cue almost guarantees the behavior. For instance, seeing a slice of cake may immediately awaken a craving, not because the cake itself has power, but because past repetitions have fused the cue with the expectation of sweetness. That's why people trying to eat healthier often struggle when their kitchen is stocked with junk food. The cues are everywhere, and resisting them repeatedly is like walking through a minefield daily. The detective's smarter move isn't to resist harder, but to redesign the scene, removing or hiding the dangerous cues, while amplifying the helpful ones so good habits feel natural, even unavoidable. Imagine placing fruit in a bowl on the counter instead of tucking it away, or leaving a book by your pillow instead of your phone, so the cue directs you toward growth. We like to think we're creatures of discipline, but the truth is we're creatures of environment, and whoever shapes the cues controls the narrative, whether we realize it or not. This is why change often fails. People try to summon willpower while living in spaces wired against them, forgetting that cues are the sparks. And without changing the sparks, the fire keeps reigniting. When you understand this, the logic becomes clear. Habits don't begin with the behavior itself, but with the tiny signals leading up to it. And the clearer those signals, the stronger the behavior. The detective story of habits always starts with awareness, and awareness begins with cues. So if you want to rewrite your patterns, you must first learn to see what was invisible before. And once you master seeing, the question sharpens. How do you deliberately start a new habit, anchoring it so firmly that it grows naturally out of cues already etched into your daily life? Starting a new habit often feels like chasing smoke, because motivation rises, motivation falls, and before long, the routine you swore would change your life fades into the same old background noise. The mystery isn't why habits fail, but why some survive, and the clue lies not in discipline or inspiration, but in anchoring the new behavior to something already cemented in daily life. This is called habit stacking, and it works like piggybacking clues in a detective's case, attaching the new action to an existing one so the trigger feels natural rather than forced. Instead of vowing to meditate daily at some vague time, you tie it to brushing your teeth. So once the toothbrush is down, the next action follows almost automatically in sequence. The existing habit acts as a cue, a signpost telling your brain what comes next. And because the anchor is strong, the new routine gains stability, avoiding the fatal drift. Consider someone who decides to write one sentence after pouring morning coffee. Soon, the smell of coffee itself becomes the signal, and the identity of writer quietly grows stronger every day. The power of stacking is that you don't rely on vague schedules or bursts of energy. You tether actions to something solid, something guaranteed to happen, like stepping stones guiding the way. The brain thrives on patterns, and the more you align new behaviors with rhythms already in place, the less effort you need to remember, decide, or motivate yourself into consistency. Another detective trick for new habits is implementation intention. turning vague wishes into sharp clues, specifying exactly when and where the action will happen, so uncertainty never has the chance to intervene. I will exercise at 7 a.m. in the living room carries a precision that I should exercise more never will, because the plan eliminates ambiguity and strengthens the cue response link. Research consistently shows that vague goals collapse under the weight of distraction, but detailed plans, written like instructions to yourself, anchor behavior so firmly that skipping feels like breaking a promise. It's the difference between saying, "I'll try to call my mother this week," and writing, "I'll call her Sunday at 5 p.m. One drifts, the other holds you accountable. The detective lesson is this: the more specific the cue, the stronger the habit, because precision eliminates the cracks where excuses and forgetfulness usually slip through unnoticed. Stacking and planning aren't about forcing effort. They're about engineering inevitability, creating conditions so obvious and clear that the path forward is practically lit up, reducing friction until behavior feels natural. The truth is, we rarely rise to the level of our motivation. We fall to the structure of our systems, and systems anchored in clarity almost always outperform raw willpower. New habits survive not because they're exciting, but because they're anchored, and the sharper the connection between cue and action, the more likely the loop will repeat until it becomes identity. So the question sharpens once again: if anchoring habits is the key to starting them, what role does the larger environment play? And how can surroundings quietly pull us towards success or failure? People love to talk about motivation as if it's a magical fuel powering transformation. But the detective story hidden in plain sight shows that context, your environment, often matters far more than fleeting bursts of enthusiasm. Think about walking into a kitchen where cookies sit on the counter, fresh and warm. You don't need motivation to want one, because the environment itself has already cued the craving and shaped the decision. Now imagine the same kitchen stripped clean, fruit in the bowl, no cookies in sight. Suddenly, the desire fades, not because your willpower grew, but because the cue never appeared. This is the secret detectives of behavior uncover. Environment is the invisible hand guiding your habits, shaping behavior silently, while people credit discipline, unaware their surroundings were actually pulling the strings. Habits are context dependent. Change the environment, and you change the likelihood of the behavior repeating, because cues are tied to places, objects, and situations far more tightly than they are tied to motivation. Consider how you feel in a library compared to a bar. The space whispers expectations, nudging behavior automatically, and this is why certain habits thrive in one environment, but wither in another. The genius move isn't to summon motivation endlessly, but to rearrange your world so the right cues are obvious and the wrong ones vanish, stacking the odds silently in your favor. If you want to practice guitar, don't bury it in the closet. Place it in the living room, ready to play, the cue staring you down until the action feels inevitable. If you want to eat healthier, hide junk food, put fruit within reach, arrange the fridge so vegetables are visible. Design the setting so the choice doesn't demand discipline, only awareness. People who seem disciplined often aren't stronger than others. They're simply better detectives of context, designing environments where success is easier and temptations don't constantly call for exhausting battles of willpower. The reverse also holds. Destructive environments reinforce destructive habits, because cues are everywhere, and resisting them repeatedly drains energy until the environment wins, no matter how strong motivation felt at the start. This is why changing cities, jobs, or homes often reshapes habits dramatically, because new environments strip away old cues, and suddenly, routines once automatic no longer fire in the same way. But you don't need to uproot your life to shift behavior. Small environmental tweaks act like rearranging clues at a crime scene, altering the story that unfolds without requiring heroic self-control. The detective lesson here is simple. Behavior is not just about what you want, but about what surrounds you. And whoever controls the environment controls the direction of your habits. Motivation is fickle, but context is steady. And once you recognize the silent influence of space, you realize the smartest strategy is not to fight cravings, but to redesign the battlefield entirely. So the case grows deeper. If environment wields such power over behavior, then maybe the real secret to self-control is not resisting temptation at all, but removing its presence altogether before it ever appears. For centuries, people have praised self-control, treating it like a heroic trait, as if the strongest among us simply resist temptation through raw force. But the detective's lens shows another truth hiding underneath. When researchers study people with the greatest self-control, the surprising discovery was that they weren't battling temptation more fiercely. They were exposed to it less often, arranging their lives so temptation rarely appeared. It wasn't extraordinary discipline keeping them safe. It was clever design, environment structured to remove dangerous cues, so their willpower was spared, never wasted on endless wrestling matches against desires waiting in plain sight. This flips the old story. Self-control isn't about saying no more often. It's about encountering fewer situations that demand a no, reducing friction so discipline is conserved for moments that truly matter. Think of someone trying to quit drinking. If they spend evenings at bars with friends, temptation looms constantly. But if they build a different routine, the battle shrinks because the cues vanish. Or imagine trying to cut back on social media. Deleting apps from your phone doesn't guarantee freedom, but it raises the barrier, buying you space, making the habit less automatic and more deliberate. This is the detective trick. Avoid the crime scene and you avoid the crime, because willpower is unreliable when temptation lingers. But structure removes the trigger before the cycle even begins. People relapse not because they are weak, but because they underestimate context, believing self-control will save them, while the environment keeps throwing cues like clues leading back to the old behavior. The best detectives of habit change know prevention beats resistance. It's easier to stay out of trouble than to fight your way out once desire has already been awakened. This is why eliminating bad cues is as important as amplifying good ones. Because every environment carries invisible triggers, and even the strongest identity can erode when cues whisper persistently enough. The trap is thinking discipline must carry you forever, but no one sustains endless resistance. Instead, success belongs to those who redesign the landscape, so the need for resistance rarely arises. When you understand this, self-control stops being a personal flaw or strength. It becomes an environmental equation, a story of cues and context that either fuel temptation or let it wither quietly. Good habits flourish when cues are obvious and aligned with your goals, while bad habits dissolve when their signals are buried, stripped of the oxygen they need to spark into action. The lesson is not to glorify restraint, but to glorify design, because the person who appears disciplined may simply be living in a world where temptations are scarce and cues encourage progress. So the detective's question sharpens further. If habits depend on cues and self-control is really about avoiding bad ones, how can we deliberately flip the script to make good habits irresistible instead? If habits are powered by cues and self-control is mostly environmental, then the next riddle is obvious. How do you design habits so attractive they pull you forward effortlessly, like clues you can't ignore? The answer begins in the brain, with dopamine, the chemical of anticipation, not just of pleasure. Because desire doesn't come from rewards themselves, but from the expectation of rewards hovering just ahead. Dopamine surges not when you eat the cookie, but when you anticipate the sweetness. Not when you open social media, but when you expect novelty, connection, or laughter waiting just a tap away. The craving lives in anticipation, and the stronger the anticipation, the more powerful the habit becomes, which is why making habits irresistible requires linking them to powerful sources of expectation. Consider temptation bundling, a detective's clever strategy. You pair a habit you want with something you already crave, fusing the two so the attractiveness of one drags the other along. Imagine saying you'll only watch your favorite show while exercising on the stationary bike. Suddenly, the cue of entertainment amplifies the pull of movement, making exercise less chore and more indulgence. Or picture allowing yourself a latte only while studying. The craving for taste attaches itself to learning, and soon the brain interprets the entire routine as a rewarding loop worth repeating. By bundling desires, you create irresistible cues, designing habits that glow with the allure of something already deeply satisfying, tricking the brain into treating discipline as indulgence instead of sacrifice. This is why habits of entertainment spread so easily. They carry strong dopamine anticipation, while habits of growth often fail because the anticipation feels dull, distant, or disconnected from immediate pleasure. The solution isn't to force motivation, but to reframe growth so the cues sparkle, to make progress feel good in the moment, not only in the distant, abstract future. People stick with what feels rewarding now, and if you can engineer that spark, you tilt the scales because anticipation, not willpower, becomes the engine carrying the habit forward. The detective's job is to stack the evidence so the desired habit doesn't just look logical, but feels magnetic, wrapped in attraction strong enough to outcompete the pull of distraction. This principle explains why social environments matter too, because humans crave belonging, and behaviors attracted to a group often spread rapidly, while those isolated or mocked rarely survive the long-term test. If your peers exercise, exercise looks attractive. If they smoke, smoking looks attractive. Identity and community amplify desire, which is why surrounding yourself with the right group accelerates habit adoption. The magnetism of habits, then, comes from both bundling personal pleasures and aligning with social cues, each multiplying desire until resistance fades and the behavior feels obvious, easy, and enjoyable. Once you see this clearly, the path sharpens. To make habits irresistible, you don't beg for motivation. You manipulate anticipation, stacking temptations and shaping identity until attraction itself becomes your ally. And so the case continues. If habits thrive on attraction, what happens when the very people around you, your family, your friends, your peers, become the most powerful detectives of all? If you want to solve the mystery of why some habits stick and others vanish, you can't ignore the influence of the people around you, because culture acts like gravity, pulling behavior silently. Humans are wired to imitate, to mirror the tribe, because belonging once meant survival, and even now, our choices are constantly shaped by family, friends, and the invisible expectations of our social groups. We copy habits from three sources most powerfully: the close, the many, and the powerful. Those we love, those surrounding us in numbers, and those we admire or fear. Start with the close. Families shape everything from eating habits to speech patterns, not through lectures, but through repetition. Cues repeated daily until behaviors feel normal simply because they were modeled consistently. If your partner keeps snacks at home, resisting them becomes harder. If your roommate works out regularly, exercise feels more natural. Proximity is power, and those nearby sculpt your cues unconsciously. Then comes the many. Crowds dictate what feels acceptable, what feels embarrassing, what habits rise and fall. Because humans fear isolation and instinctively mirror majority behavior, even when they don't consciously agree. Consider laughter in a theater. Jokes feel funnier when everyone laughs. Silence feels heavier when no one reacts, and habits work the same way, magnified or minimized depending on group consensus. Finally, the powerful. Leaders, celebrities, mentors, even respected peers. We imitate them not just because of their status, but because their habits signal success, safety, or desirability, shaping what we crave subconsciously. A teenager smokes not just for nicotine, but to mirror peers who seem confident. An employee adopts workplace rituals not just for efficiency, but because powerful colleagues model them as signs of belonging. Detectives of behavior see clearly that social cues are the strongest of all, often overriding logic, discipline, or even personal desire, because the cost of rejection feels heavier than the cost of change. This is why habits stick best in communities where they're celebrated, where desired behaviors earn approval, support, and reinforcement, making them feel attractive, normal, and aligned with the identity of the group. Join a running club, and running feels less like exercise and more like community. Attend a writing group, and writing feels less like solitary struggle and more like connection, recognition, shared identity. The trap is the opposite. Destructive groups normalize destructive habits, and once cues are reinforced by belonging, even harmful routines feel attractive, because isolation seems worse than harm within the tribe. This is why changing environments often transforms behavior. New groups carry new standards, new expectations, and new cues, reshaping habits not through force, but through the gravitational pull of belonging. The detective lesson here is sharp. If you want better habits, choose groups where your desired behavior is the norm, because what feels normal eventually feels attractive, and attraction sustains repetition. Belonging is one of the strongest cravings humans know, and when aligned with positive routines, it makes growth nearly effortless. Not because the task is easier, but because rejection is unthinkable. So the question sharpens again. If culture shapes habits this powerfully, then how do you identify and repair the invisible forces driving destructive routines that thrive, even when you desperately want to stop? Every bad habit hides a mystery, a deeper cause disguised beneath the surface. And if you only fight the behavior itself, you miss the real culprit quietly driving the repetition behind the scenes. The loop always begins with a cue, but the stronger driver is craving, the story your brain tells about what relief or reward awaits. Because every bad habit solves some problem temporarily. Smoking solves stress in the moment. Scrolling solves boredom. Drinking solves social anxiety. Procrastination solves fear of failure. The habit survives not because it's good, but because it works, at least briefly. The detective's trick is to look past the surface action and ask what job the habit is performing. Because only by solving that job differently can you dismantle the cycle. If stress triggers smoking, the real question isn't how do I stop smoking, but how else can I handle stress? Because removing the cigarette without replacing the relief leaves a vacuum. This is why most attempts at quitting fail. People strip away the behavior but ignore the craving, leaving the system unstable, and sooner or later, the old pattern slips back in. The smarter strategy is substitution. Find healthier responses that satisfy the same craving, giving the brain the relief it seeks without reinforcing the destructive loop that caused the damage. Instead of smoking, try deep breathing. Instead of procrastinating, break the task smaller. Instead of scrolling endlessly, text a friend. The craving finds satisfaction, but the cost no longer grows. The detective's investigation doesn't stop at substitution. It also asks whether the cues themselves can be restructured, because many bad habits exist only because the environment constantly triggers the craving into action. Keep alcohol in the house, and drinking is always an option. Keep your phone by the bed, and distraction is inevitable. Cues repeat because environments are loaded with reminders of the habit. The solution is environment design. Hide, remove, or rearrange cues so the old loop can't even begin, weakening the craving until the brain stops expecting the old reward entirely. Awareness is another key. Many bad habits run automatically, and until you identify the cue craving response reward loop, the behavior feels unchangeable, like a riddle you can't solve because you've never seen the pieces. The detective's notebook here is journaling or reflection, tracking triggers and actions, exposing the links your unconscious mind tries to keep hidden. Because once visible, the loop becomes something you can deliberately alter. Bad habits persist because they serve invisible needs, and until those needs are addressed, removal feels like deprivation. But once you substitute and redesign, the brain accepts new solutions willingly. The mystery then turns on its head. Every bad habit is not proof of weakness, but proof of a need unaddressed, a craving searching for relief, a system that must be rewired. So the deeper question becomes, if the brain learns through repetition, how do we structure habits so repetition feels effortless and the good patterns grow as naturally as the bad ones did? Progress often feels agonizingly slow, like you're trudging through fog without landmarks. But the detective's truth is this. Speed matters far less than direction, and moving steadily forward always beats sprinting and collapsing. People chase instant results, demanding breakthroughs, but habits are more like compounding interest, invisible until the curve bends upward. And those who stay patient through the flat stretch eventually enjoy exponential returns. Walking slowly still works. because consistency builds evidence. And as long as you don't slip backward, the votes for your new identity accumulate until belief in your transformation becomes undeniable. The trap is impatience, because when progress feels invisible, people abandon routines, assuming nothing is working, even though the detective sees clearly. Each repetition is a clue stacking quietly toward eventual breakthrough. Consider bamboo. For years, growth seems non-existent underground, roots spreading silently, until suddenly it shoots skyward at incredible speed. Habits work the same: invisible foundation first, then explosive growth later. This is why it's dangerous to measure progress only by external results, because what looks stagnant might actually be the accumulation of hidden forces preparing for visible transformation just ahead. The smart approach is to lower the bar for consistency, making habits so small they're almost impossible to skip. Because perfection isn't required, but persistence ensures you never reset completely. Missing once is normal, missing twice is a pattern, and the detective knows the key is never letting setbacks compound, because momentum, once lost repeatedly, is harder to rebuild than maintain. Improvement compounds just like decline, and the difference often isn't dramatic effort, but simply refusing to quit. Taking small steps daily, trusting the accumulation even when visible proof hasn't yet arrived. Patience here isn't passive. It's strategic, because persistence allows compounding to work. And compounding is the quiet law of the universe that magnifies tiny gains into extraordinary outcomes over time. Every small improvement is like interest on savings, barely noticeable alone, but repeated long enough, the gains stack into life-changing results, far beyond what early efforts seem to justify. Walking slowly means forgiving imperfection, accepting that missteps happen, but never letting those missteps reverse the story. Because what matters most is progress direction, not the illusion of flawless execution. This detective insight reframes success. It's not the fastest, strongest, or most talented who win consistently, but those who refuse to backtrack, who keep walking, stacking repetitions until the dam finally breaks. So the clue becomes clear. Slow steps forward, even when tiny, accumulate evidence of identity, and that identity compounds into unstoppable momentum, carrying you farther than speed alone ever could. And the case now deepens. If small improvements build power through patience, then how do we measure progress in a way that keeps us moving when motivation fades and distractions multiply? If habits are the invisible architecture of daily life, then the detective's sharpest clue about why some survive and others fail is simple. Humans naturally gravitate toward the path requiring the least effort. We are wired for efficiency, conserving energy whenever possible, because survival once depended on not wasting strength unnecessarily. And even now, our brains instinctively choose easier actions over harder ones, regardless of long-term outcomes. That's why streaming replaces DVDs, cars replace walking, fast food replaces cooking. When two options compete, the easier one almost always wins, unless you deliberately redesign the environment to shift the balance. The law of least effort explains why bad habits persist. They're easier, and why good habits struggle. They often carry friction, require more steps, more energy, more conscious effort. The detective's task is clear. If you want a habit to thrive, reduce friction until the behavior feels nearly automatic, because ease multiplies repetition, and repetition solidifies identity through accumulated evidence. Consider laying out gym clothes the night before. The barrier shrinks, so the step into exercise is smoother, while hiding the remote or uninstalling apps increases friction against the habits you're trying to avoid. Each action is shaped by how many steps stand between cue and response, and the more you shorten that distance, the more natural and inevitable the habit begins to feel. This is why technology companies obsess over reducing clicks, loading times, and sign-ins, because they know every additional bit of friction decreases adoption, while removing effort multiplies engagement until it feels irresistible. Your habits work the same way. If reading requires reaching across the room for a book, you'll probably skip, but if the book is beside your bed, the friction evaporates. Detectives of behavior change understand this principle intuitively. The easiest option usually wins. So stack the deck in your favor by making good habits effortless and bad habits inconvenient. Want to play guitar? Keep it on a stand within reach. Want to eat less junk? Don't buy it in the first place. Want to practice gratitude? Keep a notebook on your pillow. Friction, then, is not just an obstacle. It's a lever, and you can apply it in both directions, smoothing the path for good habits while deliberately roughening the path for bad ones. A smoker who makes cigarettes harder to access, keeping them locked away, stored far from sight, increases the steps required, weakening the automatic loop, reducing repetition until the craving loses power. Meanwhile, the same person who places a water bottle on the desk removes friction for hydration, ensuring the easier choice is also the healthier one, a small tweak with compounding influence. The detective's insight here is profound. Behavior flows downhill like water, always following the path of least resistance, and whoever shapes that path ultimately controls the direction of habits. Motivation becomes irrelevant when ease is properly engineered, because the brain defaults to whatever feels simpler, and when good habits are simpler, they survive without constant battles for willpower or attention. So the case sharpens once more. If ease is a secret to repetition, then perhaps the next clue is learning how to automate habits entirely, removing effort altogether until they run invisibly. Procrastination is a slippery villain lurking in plain sight, convincing you that tomorrow is safer, easier, or somehow better, but the detective's lens reveals its weakness. The hardest part of most habits is simply starting. Once motion begins, momentum usually carries you forward, but hesitation builds walls, and the longer you stall, the taller the walls grow until even small actions feel impossibly heavy to push through. This is where the 2-minute rule enters like a master key, a principle so simple it seems laughable. Any habit can be started by scaling it down to just 2 minutes. Want to run? Put on your shoes. Want to read? Open the book. Want to meditate? Sit quietly for 2 minutes. The goal isn't completion. It's initiation, lowering friction until starting feels trivial. Detectives of habit change know this truth. Perfection is intimidating, but beginnings are manageable, and once a habit is in motion, the energy often carries naturally into something larger than you originally demanded. A student who commits to studying 2 minutes often continues for 20, because the hardest barrier isn't endurance but entry, the moment when resistance fights hardest before momentum takes over. The rule works because it bypasses the brain's excuses, reframing habits as bite-sized actions, too small to refuse, removing the psychological weight of ambition that usually stalls progress indefinitely. Even if you stop after 2 minutes, the habit still wins because identity begins to shift. Reading one page makes you a reader. Tying shoes makes you a runner, even without distance covered. This is the detective insight. Consistency is about reinforcing identity, not maximizing results immediately, and 2 minutes is enough to cast a vote, the small clue that reinforces who you are becoming. Critics may argue that 2 minutes isn't enough to matter, but the truth is repetition matters more than duration early on, because building the habit scaffold is harder than extending it later. Once the structure exists, expansion feels natural. A habit that starts at 2 minutes can scale upward, but a habit that never starts cannot grow at all, no matter how ambitious. Think of it as gateway habits, entry ramps leading onto larger highways. Tiny beginnings that remove resistance until the behavior flows easily into longer, deeper, more meaningful practice. A writer who promises one sentence often ends with a page. A person who ties shoes often ends with a workout. The small act unlocks momentum, collapsing the barrier to progress. The 2-minute rule also reveals a deeper principle. Habits must feel easy in the beginning, because if the entry is painful, the brain resists, but if the entry is smooth, repetition thrives. So the trick isn't discipline but design. Creating a habit so small it feels almost silly, because what matters is the vote cast, the signal sent, the momentum initiated, not the duration logged. The detective's notebook here would read, "Focus on the entrance, not the exit." Because once you step across the threshold, the case usually solves itself, the behavior unfolding more naturally than expected. And so the investigation deepens. If 2 minutes is enough to start, then perhaps the next great clue lies not in beginning, but in sustaining, in making habits so rewarding they stick permanently. Every detective knows the cleanest solution is prevention, removing the chance of crime before it begins. And the same logic applies to habits. The best way to change behavior is to make good ones unavoidable. This is the power of automation, structuring your environment so strongly that the desired behavior happens with almost no thought, while the undesired one becomes too difficult, locked away behind deliberate friction. Consider setting automatic savings transfers. Money moves before you can spend it, turning discipline into default. The system quietly ensuring consistency without requiring constant decisions, willpower, or even reminders. Or think of subscribing to grocery delivery with healthy options, removing the temptation of last-minute junk food purchases, turning what once required discipline into something inevitable, guided by systems rather than impulse. The detective principle here is decisive. Remove choice wherever possible, because the fewer decisions required, the stronger the habit becomes, and the less chance you have to negotiate yourself into failure. Bad habits collapse under the same strategy when made impossible or inconvenient. If you remove apps from your phone, you can't scroll mindlessly. If no alcohol is at home, drinking requires intentional effort. Every bit of friction you add to a bad habit is like erecting barriers on the crime scene, slowing momentum until the craving fades, while every friction removed from good habits speeds repetition. Design beats discipline, because once the system is in place, the path of least resistance aligns with the habit you want, making the right choice automatic and the wrong one unthinkable. This is why people who seem highly disciplined often aren't stronger. They've simply engineered inevitability, built environments and systems where habits occur naturally without constant battles of willpower or temptation. The detective sees clearly. The greatest wins don't come from dramatic effort, but from designing worlds where the good happens by default and the bad cannot even begin to ignite. Technology is a powerful accomplice here because automation removes choice. Alarms remind you, smart plugs turn devices off, calendar blocks create focus, and once systems handle decisions, your brain conserves energy for progress. Imagine locking away your television in a cabinet and storing the key across the house. Suddenly, watching feels tedious, while reading the book sitting beside you becomes the easier, more natural option. Or picture scheduling bills to pay automatically. Financial responsibility becomes inevitable, not because you worked harder, but because you eliminated the option of forgetting, transforming potential chaos into consistent reliability. The heart of this detective lesson is clarity. If you want better habits, don't rely on fragile motivation. Build systems that make the behavior inevitable and design obstacles that make failure impractical. When habits are inevitable, they no longer feel like choices. They feel like identity express, and once identity takes over, momentum strengthens, compounding into outcomes that appear effortless to those watching from outside. So the mystery deepens further. If inevitability is the strongest foundation for habits, then how can progress be measured clearly enough to ensure you're not simply repeating, but actually improving? Every mystery has a central rule, the one principle that explains the clues scattered everywhere. And in the case of habits, the cardinal rule is this: what is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. Humans evolved to prioritize instant consequences over distant rewards, because survival depended on responding quickly to immediate threats and opportunities. And even now, our brains weigh present experiences far more heavily than distant possibilities. That's why exercise feels difficult. The discomfort is now, while the health benefits are later, and junk food feels irresistible, because the sweetness is now, while the health costs are far away. The detective insight is clear. If you want a habit to last, you must bring rewards into the present, making satisfaction immediate. So the brain sees value now. not just in the future. This is why people track workouts or mark progress calendars. The visual evidence feels rewarding in the moment, transforming abstract effort into something tangibly satisfying, a signal that repetition is worthwhile. Gamification works the same way. Apps that celebrate small wins with points or streaks deliver instant feedback, feeding the craving loop with rewards that feel good immediately, even before long-term benefits arrive. The opposite is also true. Bad habits persist because they often feel good instantly, even when destructive later. So the solution isn't just resisting, but adding friction to delay or dull the immediate reward. Think of smoking bans in public places. The inconvenience reduces immediate pleasure, while taxes raise costs, punishing the action now instead of waiting years for health consequences to discourage behavior. Or consider someone trying to quit scrolling. By logging out after each use, the immediate annoyance punishes the habit slightly, creating just enough resistance to weaken repetition until the craving fades. This is the detective's main clue. Behaviors that feel rewarding in the moment stick, and behaviors that feel punishing fade, regardless of what logic or long-term reasoning might suggest about outcomes. The key, then, is alignment. Find ways to make good habits satisfying immediately, whether through tracking, celebration, or pairing them with pleasures, while making bad habits unsatisfying right away through friction or penalties. It's not enough to know that habits compound into great results later. The brain demands proof now, a signal of satisfaction in the present that keeps momentum alive long enough for compounding to unfold. This is why reinforcement matters so deeply. When feedback loops deliver small wins quickly, identity strengthens, and once the habit becomes tied to identity, the satisfaction grows intrinsic, requiring less external celebration. At first, though, you must engineer rewards deliberately, because the brain resists patience, and habits without immediate reinforcement rarely last long enough to show their real value in the future. The detective lesson sharpens. Reward shapes behavior more reliably than intention, and until rewards are aligned with growth, even the best intentions collapse under the weight of present discomfort. So the case leads to another question. If satisfaction is the key to repetition, then how do we build habits that feel rewarding enough to sustain themselves without constant external reinforcement? The real puzzle of habits isn't starting them, it's keeping them alive, because beginnings are fueled by excitement, but longevity depends on building a system strong enough to survive boredom, distraction, and the grind of repetition. Detectives of behavior know that what gets measured gets managed, and tracking habits is one of the simplest yet most powerful tools because the visual evidence of progress provides satisfaction in the present moment. A check mark on the calendar, a tally in a notebook, or a digital streak on an app. These cues reinforce identity, proving to your brain that the habit is real and continuing. Habit tracking works because it turns invisible progress visible, creating a small but immediate reward, a clue that tells your mind the effort mattered today. Even if long-term results are still unseen, consider a chain of X's on a wall calendar for daily writing. Each mark becomes a victory, and soon the real motivation is not breaking the chain, preserving the evidence of consistency. The detective's insight here is clear. Momentum is fragile, but once it's visible, it becomes easier to protect, because the fear of losing progress often fuels repetition more than abstract long-term goals. Habit tracking also exposes truth. It reveals gaps you might otherwise ignore, showing when patterns slip, forcing awareness instead of denial, because evidence, once collected, makes the invisible visible beyond excuses. But the trap lies in perfectionism. Missing once is harmless, missing twice begins a pattern. And the key is not never failing, but never letting failure repeat in the backward momentum. This is why never miss twice is such a powerful safeguard. It reframes relapse as temporary, preventing the spiral that convinces people they failed completely after one mistake. Tracking also reinforces identity. When you see progress stacked daily, your belief in being a writer, athlete, or learner strengthens, because evidence piles up visibly, shifting identity from fragile to solid. The brain craves closure, and each mark offers completion, a small surge of satisfaction. And over time, that reinforcement builds habit loops strong enough to survive dips in motivation. Yet detectives also know tracking must stay simple. If it becomes tedious, the system collapses, because tracking should serve the habit, not become a second burden layer on top of it. A notebook beside the bed, a wall calendar in the kitchen, a digital reminder on your phone. The method doesn't matter, as long as it captures evidence quickly and consistently. Tracking habits reveals patterns, motivates repetition, strengthens identity, and offers immediate rewards, solving the riddle of consistency by giving the brain what it craves most, proof that today's effort wasn't wasted. So the detective question sharpens once again. If tracking builds momentum, then how do we prevent the inevitable plateau, the moment when progress stalls and boredom tempts us back into destructive routines? Every detective knows a partner sharpens performance, because knowing someone is watching changes behavior and in habits. Accountability works the same way. The presence of another person raises the stakes and strengthens commitment. When actions are private, failure feels invisible, easy to excuse or ignore. But when someone else expects you to show up, the pressure of reputation becomes a powerful motivator to follow through. This is why accountability partners transform habits. They create immediate consequences, blending social reward for success with social punishment for failure, harnessing belonging and fear of disappointment as fuel for consistency. Consider a workout buddy. Missing the gym alone is easy, but missing when someone waits for you carries shame, and the cost of disappointing them outweighs the comfort of skipping. Or think of writing groups where authors submit work regularly. The deadline exists not because motivation magically appeared, but because the group enforces accountability, ensuring progress through external expectations. The detective truth is this: humans crave approval and fear embarrassment, and when habits are tied to those forces, consistency rises naturally, without relying solely on fragile internal motivation. Formal systems amplify the effect. Contracts that include penalties for failure, commitments posted publicly, or wagers with friends all raise stakes, ensuring that falling short delivers immediate consequences you cannot easily ignore. This is why professional athletes perform best under lights, why deadlines drive productivity, why promises made to others often carry more weight than promises whispered privately to ourselves. An accountability partner acts like a mirror, reflecting back your actions, stripping away excuses, and ensuring reality matches intention, because deception becomes harder when someone else tracks the evidence. The strongest accountability comes when the partner is respected or admired, because the cost of losing their approval feels heavier, and the brain prioritizes habits that protect status within the relationship. But even casual accountability works. A friend waiting for a walk, a colleague checking your progress, a group expecting your presence, each one adds gravity, pulling behavior forward with social force. The detective insight here is that social consequences often matter more than personal goals. Because humans evolved to survive in groups, and rejection once meant danger, a truth still coded deeply within us. Accountability transforms invisible habits into visible commitments, raising the stakes until consistency becomes the only safe path. A strategy that works because the fear of letting others down outweighs temporary discomfort. Over time, accountability builds discipline into identity, because repeated follow-through in the presence of others convinces you that reliability is who you are, reinforcing reputation until it becomes inseparable from self-image. The smartest detectives of behavior know this trick. Don't just design cues or rewards, design witnesses, because when someone else watches the case unfold, you're far less likely to abandon the pursuit. So the case sharpens again. If accountability strengthens habits by raising social stakes, what happens when habits grow boring, when novelty fades? And the greatest threat isn't failure, but the slow creep of complacency? Talent is one of the greatest mysteries in human performance, a puzzle people explain with destiny or hard work. But the detective's lens reveals a sharper truth. Genetics set the stage, yet habits determine the performance. Every person carries natural advantages, coded in DNA, shape and height, body type, speed, or even predispositions toward patience, focus, or risk-taking. And these differences create environments where some habits thrive more easily than others. A tall frame benefits basketball. A compact build suits gymnastics. An analytical mind favors chess. And while effort matters, the right environment aligned with natural strengths accelerates progress dramatically. The detective insight here is crucial. Success often comes not from grinding against limitations, but from aligning habits with areas where your natural wiring offers leverage, turning effort into amplified results. Genes don't dictate destiny, but they create inclinations, and when habits complement those inclinations, progress feels easier, like water flowing downhill rather than uphill, momentum multiplied instead of constantly resisted. This is why some people seem effortlessly gifted. Their habits intersect perfectly with their natural tendencies, creating compounding advantages that outsiders mistake for raw talent alone. The smarter move isn't to envy talent, but to investigate your own wiring, discovering where habits align with strengths, because doubling down there yields growth that feels rewarding rather than punishing. Detectives of behavior recognize this law. The best strategy is not to force habits in mismatched arenas, but to cultivate them where you're naturally positioned to excel, building systems that magnify strengths. Consider an introvert drawn to writing rather than networking. The habit of daily journaling amplifies their reflective nature, leading to mastery, while forcing extroverted habits drains energy, eroding motivation and sustainability. Or think of someone naturally energetic, thriving in active routines. Aligning habits with sports or movement sustains them, while pushing into sedentary hobbies feels unnatural, likely collapsing despite initial enthusiasm. Genes set boundaries, but within those boundaries lies vast freedom, and habits allow you to maximize potential by playing the right game, the one tilted toward your strengths instead of your weaknesses. The detective clue here is sharp. Winners don't always work harder. They work where their work counts more, aligning repetition with natural advantage until compounding produces extraordinary outcomes. Of course, effort still matters, because talent without discipline collapses, and habits without direction scatter. But when both align, natural inclination and consistent practice, progress feels inevitable, momentum nearly unstoppable. This is why sustainable habits must feel rewarding in themselves. When effort aligns with strengths, the feedback loop grows stronger, attraction sustains repetition, and identity locks more firmly into place. The truth about talent, then, is not that it guarantees success, but that it guides you toward fertile ground, and habits are the tools you use to cultivate that ground fully. The detective's question sharpens once more. If alignment creates advantage, how do we ensure that habits not only suit strengths, but also grow consistently, avoiding stagnation when the novelty inevitably wears away? The mystery of motivation is not why people start, but why they quit, because beginnings carry excitement. Yet somewhere between boredom and frustration, the drive fades, leaving abandoned habits scattered like unsolved cases. Detectives of performance discovered a principle hidden in plain sight, the Goldilocks rule, which states that motivation peaks when challenges are neither too easy nor too hard, but just on the edge of ability. When tasks are too simple, boredom creeps in. When they're impossibly difficult, discouragement smothers effort. But when they're slightly beyond comfort, the balance ignites focus, creating flow, a state where time disappears. This is why video games captivate. Levels escalate just enough to stretch skill, providing constant progress without overwhelming the player, keeping the brain engaged with a perfect rhythm of challenge and reward. The same rule explains peak performance in sports, work, and learning, because the sweet spot keeps effort rewarding, stretching ability without breaking confidence, sustaining motivation through a balanced loop of struggle and success. Habits must be designed to live in this zone. Too easy and they collapse from boredom. Too hard and they collapse from frustration. But properly calibrated, they grow naturally, feeding curiosity and progress. Think of a runner increasing distance slightly each week, or a musician practicing songs just harder than yesterday's. Each step stretches ability while proving growth is possible, fueling motivation through immediate evidence of progress. The detective's insight here is sharp. Growth feels best when it feels possible, and the brain craves this balance, rewarding effort with engagement when challenges match ability just beyond the edge. But even well-designed habits encounter boredom eventually, because repetition dulls novelty, and the greatest threat to consistency is not failure but monotony, the slow erosion of interest when progress feels repetitive. Professionals succeed not by avoiding boredom, but by embracing it, continuing through the dull stretches, repeating even when excitement fades, because identity and systems carry them when novelty no longer does. Motivation, then, isn't about constant inspiration. It's about structuring habits in the Goldilocks zone and learning to endure boredom when it arrives, trusting repetition more than feelings of excitement. The detective lesson is clear. Amateurs quit when boredom strikes. Professionals keep going, and the difference isn't talent but persistence, the discipline to show up even when the thrill has vanished. Habits that survive boredom become identity. And once identity anchors behavior, motivation is less relevant because consistency feels like self-expression, something too deeply ingrained to abandon without betraying who you are. So the case leads further. If the Goldilocks rule explains motivation and boredom tests persistence, then perhaps the deepest mystery lies in identity itself, how habits carve the story of who we become. Every detective knows that solving one mystery often reveals another, and habits, while powerful, carry a hidden danger. The very routines that make you successful can also blind you, locking you into autopilot. Good habits create efficiency, freeing energy, but efficiency can dull awareness. What once required attention now runs automatically, and without deliberate reflection, the habit risks becoming stale, rigid, or misaligned with evolving goals. Consider a worker who masters a skill but never updates it. Their habits produce reliability, yet the world shifts, and soon competence turns into irrelevance, precision into obsolescence, success into silent decline. The detective's warning is sharp. Habits automate behavior, but automation, left unchecked, breeds complacency, and complacency blinds you to new opportunities, freezing identity in past victories while the future quietly moves forward. Habits simplify choices, but they also narrow them. Once you believe, this is who I am, or this is how I operate, experimentation fades and flexibility dies under the weight of repetition. This is why growth often stalls after initial success. The very consistency that built progress now limits exploration, creating a paradox where habits deliver stability but also stifle innovation. Detectives of behavior know the antidote. Deliberate reflection, periodically reviewing habits, asking whether they still serve current goals. Because habits meant for one chapter may sabotage growth in the next. An athlete who trains the same way forever eventually declines, because habits optimized for youth no longer suit age. A business that repeats old systems eventually collapses under competition that adapts faster. Identity compounds like habits, and both carry risk. When identity becomes too tightly tied to a single behavior, failure in that domain feels like personal collapse, because the self has fused with the habit. This is the danger of pride. Over-identifying with habits makes flexibility feel like betrayal, when in reality, growth often requires letting go of old routines to make space for stronger ones. The detective sees clearly that mastery requires balance. Habits for consistency, reflection for flexibility, systems that evolve as identity deepens, preventing autopilot from becoming prison and growth from turning into stagnation. Habits are tools, not chains. They should serve identity, not smother it, and the key is remembering that small improvements must remain adaptable, capable of shifting direction as life's mysteries change. So the question grows sharper. If habits can lock us into complacency, how do we keep learning, refining, and evolving, ensuring improvement doesn't just continue but accelerates toward mastery? Every detective knows that solving cases isn't just about gathering evidence, but also about reviewing it, checking for missed details, and adjusting theories. Because even the sharpest minds drift off course without deliberate reflection. Habits work the same way. They build automatically, but without review, they risk drifting, becoming outdated, or even working against you, silently reinforcing patterns that no longer match your goals. The solution is systematic reflection, taking time to step back and ask what's working, what's failing, and what small adjustments can realign my daily behavior with the person I want to become. A simple annual review functions like a detective's case report, cataloging successes, failures, and lessons, while a smaller monthly check keeps momentum sharp, ensuring habits don't wander too far before correction. This process forces awareness, stripping away illusions, because writing down what you did, how often you showed up, and where you slipped prevents denial and exposes the real evidence behind your progress. Reflection also prevents complacency. Even good habits grow stale when left unexamined, but reviewing them keeps growth dynamic, ensuring that routines evolve as your life, circumstances, and goals inevitably shift. Consider someone who begins exercising for weight loss. Once weight stabilizes, the habit must evolve towards strength or endurance. Otherwise, progress stalls, and the system that once fueled success quietly transforms into limitation. The detective insight here is sharp. Habits are alive, constantly interacting with identity, and without deliberate recalibration, they fossilize, turning once powerful routines into cages holding you back from future growth. Reviews don't need to be complicated. A few honest questions suffice. Am I living according to my values? Are my habits aligned with my goals? What needs reinforcing? And what needs removal? This act itself reinforces identity, because reviewing habits is evidence that you are the type of person who pays attention, learns from mistakes, and adjusts instead of stubbornly repeating unhelpful patterns. The best detectives don't cling to old theories when new evidence appears, and the best habit builders don't cling to old routines when life demands new strategies for progress. This is why reflection must be deliberate, not accidental. The habit of reviewing habits anchors growth, making adjustment itself part of the system, ensuring improvement continues indefinitely. Without review, success decays into arrogance, failure repeats endlessly, and progress drifts unnoticed. But with reflection, every mistake becomes data, every success becomes reinforcement, and every year becomes a sharper, stronger story. So the detective question sharpens once more. If reflection ensures adaptation, then how do we aim beyond simple progress, using habits not just to grow, but to achieve mastery in any domain? Success often appears dramatic, like a breakthrough moment or a sudden discovery, but the detective's magnifying glass reveals a different story. True success is rarely a single leap, but the quiet accumulation of countless small improvements. This is the principle of marginal gains, the idea that if you improve by just 1% in many areas, the tiny advantages compound until they create extraordinary differences over time. The British cycling team proved this, transforming from mediocrity to dominance by stacking minor changes, redesigned seats, cleaner environments, optimized sleep, each one too small alone, but together rewriting the trajectory of an entire sport. The detective sees the hidden pattern. Success isn't one clue but many, each adjustment building on the last, until the accumulation becomes undeniable, the kind of story outsiders mistake for luck or genius. Most people chase single breakthroughs, waiting for the lightning bolt, but those who master success understand the power of aggregation, the compounding law that rewards steady, incremental improvements more than sporadic surges of effort. Think of a plane shifting its flight path by just a few degrees. At first, the difference is invisible, but after thousands of miles, the destination is completely different. Habits are those small adjustments, and each one casts a vote for a new identity, pushing you slightly closer or slightly farther, until years later, the person you become is unrecognizable from where you began. The detective lesson here is sharp. Greatness is not achieved by doing one thing right, but by doing many things slightly better, again and again, until the small edges become enormous advantages. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. It's not the heroic workout, the all-night study session, or the dramatic gesture that defines success, but the countless repetitions no one notices. When you master marginal gains, you stop obsessing over perfection and start obsessing over progress. Because the game is about stacking improvements, not waiting for flawless execution or miraculous leaps. Even failure becomes useful under this model because mistakes provide data, lessons that refine the next iteration. And over time, the process of steady correction builds systems too strong to collapse. The detective knows this truth. Progress is never wasted because even the smallest gain, the smallest clue, contributes to the bigger case, and eventually, the aggregation delivers results far beyond initial imagination. So the question sharpens again. If success is the product of marginal gains, then how do we push beyond steady improvement into mastery, where performance seems effortless, instinctive, and almost automatic? Every detective knows the danger of solving too many cases the same way. You stop questioning, you stop learning, and the very skills that made you successful become blind spots that slowly trap you. Success carries this hidden danger because habits that once built growth can later restrict it, creating rigidity, pride, and overconfidence, turning flexibility into stubbornness and curiosity into complacency. When you succeed, you risk believing your methods are universally correct, and this belief freezes exploration. Even though environments change, opponents adapt, and what worked yesterday may quietly fail tomorrow. The detective's warning is clear. Habits are double-edged, providing stability, but also narrowing vision. And success magnifies the danger by convincing you that change is unnecessary, even when cracks are forming. Athletes who dominate early often decline fastest when they refuse to adapt. Companies that rise to power collapse when they cling to outdated systems. Individuals plateau when they protect identity instead of evolving. This is the paradox of habits. They simplify life by automating behavior, but simplification can harden into rigidity, a system optimized for the past but incapable of navigating the future. The danger grows when identity fuses tightly with success, because failure in that domain feels unbearable, threatening not just results but self-worth, leaving people clinging desperately to habits long past usefulness. Detectives of behavior know the antidote. Remain a student, even after success, treating mastery not as final but as provisional, always willing to update, adjust, and re-examine when evidence suggests new directions. Reflection and review safeguard against this trap, but humility is the foundation. Remembering that systems serve identity only if identity remains flexible, capable of letting go of old victories to make room for growth. The greatest threat to long-term success isn't failure, but stagnation, the silent comfort of routines that once delivered progress, but now quietly cap potential, locking growth behind invisible walls of habit. The detective lesson is sharp. The cost of success is the temptation to stop investigating, and the cure is endless curiosity, treating every outcome as data, never as permanent proof. So the case sharpens once more. If success risks turning into stagnation, then what separates those who plateau from those who rise continually toward mastery, refining until performance looks effortless and natural? Every mystery ends with a final clue, the revelation tying every thread together. And in the story of habits, the ultimate secret is this: true results last only when they become part of your identity. Temporary habits create temporary changes, but permanent transformation requires deeper integration, where behavior is not something you do occasionally, but something you are, inseparable from the story you tell about yourself. This is why people who focus only on goals often relapse, because goals chase outcomes, but once the outcome is achieved, the system collapses, leaving no foundation to sustain the behavior afterward. Detectives of behavior understand the difference. Goals are events, systems are processes, and identity is the deepest layer, the bedrock that ensures progress continues even when excitement fades or external rewards vanish. Lasting results come when identity drives action. When you see yourself as a runner, you run. When you see yourself as a writer, you write. The action flows naturally from the belief. This is why identity-based habits matter most. They transform effort into expression, so discipline feels less like sacrifice and more like alignment, a natural reflection of who you believe yourself to be. But identity isn't fixed. It is evidence-based, shaped by repetition, each habit a vote, each action proof, and over time, the accumulated evidence builds a self-image strong enough to anchor consistency. The detective truth is sharp. Results fade when they rely on willpower, but they last when tied to identity. Because identity sustains habits, even when circumstances, motivation, or goals shift. The secret, then, is not to chase results directly, but to cultivate systems of identity, because identity guarantees repetition. Repetition guarantees compounding, and compounding guarantees transformation that endures far beyond any single achievement. Lasting results don't come from radical bursts, but from steady expression of who you are becoming, the daily habits so small they're invisible, yet so consistent they write the long arc of your life. In the end, the mystery unravels. Success is not about goals, not even about habits alone, but about identity. The detective story of becoming someone whose actions naturally align with their vision. Atomic Habits is more than just a book. It's the distilled dedication, research, and lived experience of James Clear. Every page carries his effort to help you make small but powerful changes day by day. When you purchase the book, you're not only investing in yourself, but also supporting an author who has devoted himself to delivering knowledge that uplifts communities. Choose the official edition of Atomic Habits to honor its true value and walk alongside the author in spreading better habits to the world.